What is going on, gunfighters? Today we're going to talk about Benelli auto shotguns and focusing on the M series, the M1, the M2, the M3, the M4. So we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. So saddle up for another episode where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, being a warrior the right way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'll probably get off on some tangents today, but today's episode is not meant to be a debate on whether pump versus semi or Benelli versus Beretta 1300s or anything like that. It's specifically focusing on the Benelli M series. I'm sure we'll talk about some other stuff and how it relates, but that's the main focus of today's show, the Benelli M series. If you want a show on pump versus semi-auto or a gas versus piston gun, I've done those shows. Done many shows on the shotgun. Could do many more, hopefully, by God's grace. But today we're going to specifically focus on the M series. Now, I forget what year I first got my old Benelli M1 Super 90. It's one of the guns that, I'm not a gun collector, but that's one of the guns that I sold that I just regret selling. It was such a good gun. It was such a good shooter. And I just assumed, since that was the only Benelli that I'd ever owned, that like all shotguns were that good. Like all Benelli shotguns were going to be that good. That Benelli M1 Super 90, it was some kind of relationship between Benelli and HK, because it had both marks. It was stamped both HK, Heckler and Koch, and Benelli. So I don't know what that had to do with some kind of import. They were importing them at the time. They had some kind of relationship. But I had a Benelli M1 Super 90 HK. Phenomenal gun. Phenomenal gun. I had that thing for years and years. I can't remember when I got it, but it was in the 2000s, I believe. Anyway, I should probably back up overarchingly. The Benelli M series. There are some exceptions we'll talk about, but most notably known for being an Inertia shotgun. There are two main types of semi-automatic shotguns. There are other subtypes, but like one's based on an AK or an AR, but the two main ones are going to be gas, which is kind of cheaper, more common, has some advantages, and then the Inertia guns. And Benelli is kind of king, I think. They're the ones to be in the Inertia category for sure. And what makes the Benelli M series such remarkable guns to me is that they are so simple. And simplicity, if it's done right in a gun, often means really, really reliable. If you look at, say, an AK-47, part of its reliability is in that it's such a simple design. A few beefy moving parts. If you look at a Glock, as much as I rag on Glock, a big part of the genius of the Glock is the simplicity of that design. You look at the number of moving parts in a Glock versus, let's say, a 1911. And I'm not saying it's a better gun than a 1911, but I'm saying it is simpler. And I think that simplicity does lend to some of the reliability. If there is a simple, reliable semi-auto shotgun, to me it is the Benelli M1 and M2, and there are some differences in the M3 and the M4, but just what got me thinking about this was just yesterday, day before, I was cleaning my Benelli M2. I got done with a fairly long hunt in the rainforests of a very rural part of southeast Alaska, and it was a pretty grueling hunt, and it's a pretty trying environment. I was at no time concerned about the reliability of that, Benelli M2 that I now have, the Benelli M2, which I'll probably get into later. And just taking that gun apart and cleaning it just got me thinking about I should do this episode because it is so simple. It uses inertia, meaning like the force and the recoil of the gun itself to cycle the shotgun. And it's about as simple as I think you could reliably make a good semi-auto shotgun. It kind of shares that with the AK and the Glock, in that it's kind of genius is in its simplicity, but it doesn't give up shootability, ergonomics, and elegance, which is a hard line to toe. Most other guns that go super crude and super simple, you generally don't think of them as being elegant and ergonomic and svelte and sleek, but I do think that about the Benelli series, especially the M1 and the M2. They are elegant, they are sleek, they are refined, and they're rugged, beefy workhorses, which will stand up to the toughest hunts and the toughest environments and toughest combat conditions on Earth. And this might get nerdy on audio, but I assume some of you out there are like me and are gun nerds, so I'm going to try and describe it by God's grace with the eloquence of speech He's given me to kind of make it make sense in audio format. But if you're really curious, go watch like a video of how the M series works, especially the M1 and the M2. There's differences in the M3 and the M4, which we'll get into. But basically, the force of the shell going off, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, known as recoil. If you've ever shot a 12 gauge, you might know that it has a decent amount of recoil. That recoil gets forced back as a little kind of delay, locking, rotating bolt in the front. Not nearly as locked up tight as, say, an AR bolt, but it does rotate and then start to come back. And then that inertia pushes back on that bolt and ejects the spent round, and there's a spring in the stock. You can think of that like a buffer tube, or think of that, or buffer tube spring, or you think of that like the spring on the back of an AK, and when it goes back, it pops around up into the chamber, and that spring shoves the bolt back forward, and it locks up again. A slight rotation of the front of that bolt head into place, and it's pretty simple. Again, it's about as simple and rugged and reliable as a semi-auto shotgun I think is going to be. And it is elegant. It is a good design. It is very shootable. Now, I'd like to go straight to Benelli, but looking it up, I was fairly certain they no longer make the Benelli M1. So kind of known as the Benelli M1 Super 90. No longer make it, and they don't give like a description on their website that I can find. So we're going to go to Wikipedia. So take this with a grain of 700X or 800X or blue dot or red dot, whatever you reload with. But the Benelli M1 is a semi-automatic shotgun manufactured by Benelli Army SPA, and the first model of the Benelli Super 90 line of semi-automatic shotguns introduced in 1986. And it says it is available, which I would scratch at. I'd say it was available. But the 80s, 86. Now, I do believe they made field versions of the M1. This is not Wikipedia, this is me. I do believe they made field versions and more combat-oriented versions, gunfighting type versions of the M1 Super 90. I had the more tactical version of it, and that thing was just superb. I've heard stories, not firsthand, I have never encountered this, but I've heard stories of the M1 Super 90 being like less than reliable if you hung a bunch of extra stuff on it and making it heavier, which kind of mess with the inertial system. I'm not one to add a bunch of superfluous stuff to my guns. Mine ran like a champ with bird loads, with full power buckshot, with magnum loads. That thing was a beast. It was a great shotgun. It was light, it was handy, it was still rugged and robust. Alas, I shouldn't wax too nostalgic on the M1 Super 90 because I sold it and immediately go to this shotgun, but it's what I've settled on. It's one of my two go-to shotguns. It's the one shotgun that I brought to Alaska. It's like right up there neck and neck, as if I had to choose one long gun for the end of the world. It'd be a toss-up between this and another shotgun that I own. But the M2 is the one that succeeded it. Much like the Benelli M1, they make field versions. It's very popular for hunting, and it's very popular in tactical type situations, especially 3-gun. A lot of 3-gunners run in the Benelli M2. I think the Benelli M2 is a much better crossover gun. Now, I briefly went to an M4, which is a tank, and I quickly realized it was a good gun, but it was not what I wanted. I'll go back to the M4 later, but I sold it almost immediately after I bought the M4, and then got a Benelli M2. A Benelli M2, in my opinion, is the best all-around shotgun. You can get a Benelli M2 and get a couple of different barrels for it if you want that, if you don't just want a vent rib barrel. But I think it's the most versatile of the M series. It's, again, that same system, that Benelli M2. Simple, inertial, reliable, semi-auto shotgun. And again, they make field versions of it. They make tactical versions of it. You want to run, full powered slugs. You want to run field loads. Mine runs everything like a champ. And it's a good crossover gun. It's not crazy heavy. It points well. It shoots well. The fact that a lot of, wing shooters and hunters use them will tell you how good it points. The fact that a lot of 3-gunners use it and a lot of 3-gunners don't use, at least not a lot of top 3-gunners use like a Benelli M4. It's just, there's something elegant and efficient about the Benelli M2. I think it's a better crossover shotgun. Now let's talk about the Benelli M3. It's a very, very different shotgun. There's only one other shotgun that I can think of that's like it, and that's the notable Spaz 12. But the Benelli M3 is unique in that it is a pump and a semi-auto. You can do either one. It can run off that inertial system, or it can be a pump. My issue with that gun, I would really like to have one, is that for an all-around shotgun, and I'm not a gun collector, I don't want like one of each, right? I want a couple of good go-to shotguns. But is that I'm only aware of them making it in kind of that tactical configuration. And as far as I'm aware, the barrels don't interchange between like the M2 and the M3 or the M1 and the M3. As far as I'm aware, the M3 barrels are their own thing. And a big reason I have the shotgun is for putting meat on the table for hunting. So that kind of kills the M3 for me for that. But they're an awesome gun. If you want a pump and semi-auto that you can switch between, they did, again, make the Franchi Spaz 12, and that's a really cool looking gun. But from all reports, it's kind of big and heavy and is not known for being the most reliable. The Benelli M3, I've never heard any reports of it being unreliable. And if it's anything like the Benelli M1 or M2, it's going to be a very sleek, good shootable gun. And why might you want this? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Mentioned, mine runs field loads just fine, like light field loads. But you can go even lighter than a light field load. If you're running like a less lethal round, which generally have a lot less power, those aren't going to cycle. At least they never cycled out of my semi-autos. Talking about like a rubber baton round or a beanbag round or rubber buckshot. And that's one of the great things about the shotgun is the flexibility. You could switch over to pump mode and you could shoot several rounds of rubber buckshot one after another. Whereas you're only probably going to get the one shot off with the semi-auto because they're not normal rounds, right? They don't have the recoil. They don't have the power, and that power is part of what runs that semi-auto. Much like I've never seen a common semi-auto with the normal springs and everything run the birdshot shells. Like you can get the little shot shells, like the CCI shot shells for a Glock or an M&P, but they're not going to run those reliably because they don't have enough power. But you could get those in a 38 Special and a revolver and they'll run fine because the system operating does not depend on the power of the cartridge itself. And you get that same benefit if you got the Benelli M3. You could pump it or it could run semi-auto. If you were normally going to run full power slugs and buckshot and you wanted to transition to less lethal, you could still cycle those. And or the gun just got so filthy, like you literally were capsized in the nastiest, siltiest, muddiest swamp and managed to, get to the nearest island and it's just caked with mud. You switch over to semi-auto and just slam it back and forth and run the action a couple times to clean it out. So there are some advantages there for the pump and semi-auto. I've never personally shot. I think it's the only M series I haven't owned. I've never owned, I don't know that I've ever seen in real life a Benelli M3. They're not super common, but they do exist and I wanted to make you aware of them. They're a pump/semi-auto and they're pretty unique in that. But as far as I'm aware, the semi-auto works just like the Benelli M1 or the M2. Which is going to bring us to the Benelli M4, the epitome of combat shotguns par excellence. The combat shotgun of combat shotguns. And again, I have one of these. If you're just doing urban operations, which is kind of what this was designed for, the Marines wanted a good war-fighting warfare shotgun. And if you don't know the bio, I didn't put it in this episode, but I was a U.S. Marine Corps infantryman. I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I taught urban warfare. That's kind of what you're doing. You just want a door-kicking shotgun, like a go-to combat shotgun. You're going to run it all day with buckshot and slugs, just a big, beefy shotgun. Then, yeah, the M4 is probably your deal. Again, I don't think it's a very good crossover shotgun, not a great hunting shotgun, not a great, field shotgun. But if you just want a tank of a combat shotgun, it's the one to beat. It's the standard for semi-auto combat shotguns. Now, this is fairly unique. Make a reliable shotgun even more reliable. And again, I've never had any reliability issues with my M1 or M2. But this is kind of unique in that it also has two kind of independent gas operating systems underneath. And this is, I had to look it up. I've owned one, but I forgot what it was called, the Argo. And this is from the Benelli page, but it says USMC approved. Piston-driven, auto-regulated, gas-operated Argo system was designed for and approved by the U.S. Marine Corps. So the M4 is kind of unique. It has the M name, and I think a lot of that is just because the M series is so well known, but it's a different operating system, the M1 and the M2, that inertial-driven system. Now, this is from the Benelli website, so, this is them talking about their product. Take that for what it's worth, but this is talking about their inertial system. They have a little thing about inertia-driven system. Benelli's inertial-driven system, developed in 1967, operates cleanly and reliably without adjustments. Inertial-driven is the original version of the best operating system ever devised. There are inertial-driven Benelli shotguns that have fired 500,000 rounds and still function perfectly. Now here's one of the big reasons that I like the inertial system, specifically the M1 and the M2. And I don't want to turn this into a piston versus gas gun. Again, I've done an episode on that. You can look that up, just whatever platform you listen to this on, you can probably search gas versus inertia and gunfighter life. But what I like about that inertial system is it keeps the dirty gases and stuff in and going out of the barrel. Whereas a gas gun puts a lot of it into the operating system, and that gas is dirty. Shoot a bunch of rounds to an inertial-driven system, and you take it apart and it's still fairly clean. You do that with a gas gun and it's not clean. And I'm a survivalist, a prepper. I don't apologize for that. I also hunt hard. And I like the fact that dirty, nasty stuff that attracts moisture and corrosion, and even if it's not corrosive ammo, just the attraction of moisture and gunk and stuff in there is not going to accumulate nearly as fast. I like that. And I like the simplicity of it. It's not all perks. There are some perks to gas guns. But for a hard use tool and for a reliable trust my life to semi-auto, I like the inertial system. And I think that is kind of Benelli's arena there. Now, there are some imitators of the Benelli. And I'm talking about like the cheap knockoffs. If you think you're getting a Benelli M4 or M2 for a very small fraction of the price and that sounds too good to be true, I would say it probably is. Part of the things that make the Benelli shotguns so great is they're really, really well made. Again, they are simple and rugged and robust, but they're also really, really well done with fit and finish and chrome-lined parts and chrome bolt heads and really, really impervious to the elements' finishes and a lot of times like cryo chokes and cryogenically treated parts and all that stuff. So again, if you think you're going to get some Muslim-made cheap knockoff for a fraction of the price and it's going to be just as good, I will say it probably will look just as good and it'll work until it doesn't. Those are my thoughts on the cheaper knockoffs of the Benelli system. If you want that rugged reliability, get the Benelli. And if you want less expensive, I'd say there's nothing wrong with a pump shotgun. If you want a less expensive but still rugged, reliable option, I would say transition over to, maybe not a step down because they have their advantages too, but transition over to a slide action, or commonly called a pump action. If you want to stick with the Benelli Novas and Supernovas are not overly expensive, and there's many other options of good, reliable pump action shotguns for less money. I would transition over to a slide action, pump action shotgun before I would go with a cheap knockoff of a Benelli. So I guess that's going to start wrapping up this episode. If this is not your first rodeo here, or if you've listened to this whole episode and you like it, consider liking, subscribing, leaving a comment or review, some stars, but especially liking, subscribing, following, whatever vernacular your platform uses. Also, if you want to interact with me, if you listen to this on Spotify, there's a thing where I can ask you a question, but I flip that around. Why don't you guys ask me some questions? If you're listening on Spotify, ask me some questions on there, some gun questions. I'm here to serve, so if I can help answer some of your questions, all the things God's blessed me to do in life, the training, experience, talent, I'm blessed and humbled that God's allowed me to do that. And I want to pass those blessings on to you. If I can help in some way and serve, if I can answer your questions, again, if you're listening on Spotify, should be a thing where you can ask me questions. There's no easy way for me to respond on there, but I can answer it in a show as long as it's an appropriate question and I have a decent answer. If you're not on Spotify, don't listen on Spotify. I made a special post on Patreon. Now, a lot of stuff on Patreon, obviously, is just for patrons. But I made this post open to everybody. So it's easy to get to, easy to ask me a question. You can literally click the link in the show notes for Patreon. You don't have to sign up, give any money. You can literally just go there, scroll to the post where it says questions, and ask me a question. Patreon link in the show notes if you want to ask me a question. If you want to become a patron, I'd be humbled and blessed by your support. You can sign up for $1. But even if not, you can still ask me a question. So give that a shot if you want. Anyway, with that, the tactical tip of the day. On shotguns, if you've ever run a lot of shotgun slugs in a day, if you've ever gone to sight in your optic on your shotgun or sight in your ghost rings or whatever, or you've just been in training and run a lot of slugs in a day, not only is that hard on your shoulder, it can also be quite hard to get that lead out of the bore. First tactical tip is prevent that in the first place, an ounce of prevention. There are slugs that are clad with kind of that polymer coating nowadays, and there's also copper coated slugs. And I'm not talking about sabot slugs. Sabot slugs are made for rifled barrels. I should probably do a whole episode on just slugs for the real shotgun nerds like myself out there. But I'm talking about just regular old Foster or Bernanke slugs that have a copper coating. That can greatly reduce the amount of lead fouling in your barrel. And if you have just shot regular lead Foster slugs, a good yet soft material for a cleaning rod, maybe wrap it with some duct tape so it doesn't tear up your bore, and a bronze brush are going to be good in getting those chunks of lead out of there. And it can take a while depending on how many slugs you've shot through there. Ask me how I know. So I said an ounce of prevention is probably better. That's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. From Joshua, the book of Joshua, that is. No man shall be able to stand before me all the days of my life. As you were with Moses, so you will be with me. You will not leave me nor forsake me. Be strong and of good courage. For to this people I shall divide an inheritance in the land which you swore to our fathers to give us. Only be strong and very courageous, that I may observe to do according to all the law which Moses your servant commanded me. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that I may prosper wherever I go. This book of the law shall not depart from my mouth, but I shall meditate in it day and night, that I may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then I will make my way prosperous, and then I will have good success. Have you not commanded me to be strong and of good courage? With that, men, about meditating on the law day and night, sunset approaches for the Sabbath. I'm about to cut this off and rest. I think I got 10 minutes before Sabbath, so I'm going to make sure I got all the stuff done for Sabbath and catch you guys on the flip side. Have a blessed day.